because they do make us state that. I want to make sure that we understand that clearly. This is built on my many years of experience. Yeah, you finally get to see how old I actually am. I wasn't bullshitting, okay? I'm that freaking old. To begin with, starting this, I've been around for a hot minute, that's for certain. Very fortunate to meet this gentleman. If you do not know who Dr. Cliff Stoll is, you really need to read the book. He is a real life Doc Brown, and I had the pleasure and the honor to actually sound with him for 30 minutes at a B-Sides many years ago. Had an amazing conversation with this gentleman. He's just incredibly intelligent. And if you think I'm old school, this is a guy that actually does presentations on an overhead projector with translucent slides, which he has still kept to this day. He will not do electronic technology because it takes away his personality. And frankly, we kind of love him for that. I've got a whole bunch of certifications, SANS and all that other stuff. And of course, if you ask Aaron, he knows I'm certifiedly crazy, but that's another story. This really is about a call to action. And this is based upon my experience in building security into your organizations. It is something I've done repeatedly, and it is not something that I actually came up with on my own. The popular saying is, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and that's actually the truth. It's too bad our good friend Chris Romeo is not here tonight, because I would definitely give him all the kudos and the credit. This was an idea that I took from him a long time ago when I worked with the beginnings of the OWASP chapter. He was working with Cisco at the time, ironically, building up what was known as the Security Ninja program. I worked with him a lot to be able to understand how he did that, how he made it into such a huge success. I've repeated this program throughout my organization. So this really is a call to action about that. But in order to get into something like that, we have to first talk about, what does it actually mean to get security with your organization? It is a culture. But I'm going to challenge that mindset just a little bit. You've heard the saying, Chris repeats it himself, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, that's just a little bit of a fallacy, because just like perception's not the reality, because perception is bias, right? Culture that's not formed properly with the same vocabulary, mindset, and mission doesn't have a strategy for security. All of us have experienced one time or another having to compete with the business for, why do we need a budget in security? Why do we need a place at the table to talk about this? And I'll get into what happened last week that ought to be a little bit more of an influence for that. But it really is understanding there has to be a spend with this. This is not the fact that, yes, we are a cost item. We get it. We don't generate revenue unless you happen to work for a company that has as its product making secure products, but you're in the small minority. You are not in the majority. The rest of us in the corporate world have to deal with the fact that the bean counters don't really like us because we cost money. Doggone it. Why are you going to give us a return on this? But when we think about, excuse me?
That's what every IT team that's not part of the business.
If it has a connection to a computer, you're a cost center. Sadly, you got to bear that weight. You're absolutely right. And a lot of companies put them under the same umbrella. That's a good call out. So it gets to the point of the mindset. We have to make sure that we use the same vocabulary consistently. We all know it in the business because we've learned it. Some of us teach it. But the business doesn't know it. The business doesn't understand what does it mean from the non-technical aspect as to, why do we need to use proper security protocols? Well, because if you've read the papers lately and you're not under a rock, you know that data is being stolen literally by the minute. This is a mindset. Why this is important? Because we don't want our data stolen from us. We don't want to become front page news. Mr. CEO, you don't want to wind up in front of Congress, do you? Of course not. That's not a good place to be. And by that time, you're pretty much done and toast.
Master, there was a breach information that they had a database in the cloud and all the information, including bank information.
Yep, absolutely. And that's one of many. Ask anybody in the military, OPM.
I was just saying that I got an email from Ticketmaster, and it wasn't free tickets for the show, it was information about the breach. So it's just, they had some database in the cloud, and all the data was stolen, including financial data about cards and name and everything.
Okay.
So what you're saying is they're not using the data security software.
So Ticketmaster is breached? No, okay.
And then
Yeah.
one that was breached.
It was one.
I'll check on your credit cards this evening on the dark web.
Yep.
Okay.
That was breached customer number one.
Well,
That was Snowflake.
Okay.
And that's a good call out, because what does that come down to? That really comes down to training. If you're not delivering consistent training within your staff to understand the why, this is part of Romeo's program, what made it so successful. People don't understand what they need to do. They understand the world's on fire. What are they going to do about it? That's part of the culture of the same mindset like that. Execution is the next part of this. And all this really goes towards how I built these programs. This is a way you can take it into your organization. If you don't already have it, this is your action call. This is your call to action to go and start building it in an organization, because it requires execution. And also it requires ownership. I hate to tell you folks, but in this game, when you want people to be your security champions and advocates, it's not a participation trophy. This is the practitioner. This is the people with the hands on the keyboard. This is the people actually doing the work. If you want a program like this to be successful, everybody can't just sit around and talk about it. We're advocating for security. That's cute. What are you actually doing about it? This is how you build something like that. If you don't have something like this in your organization, I will walk you through how I've built this a couple of times over. Yes, sir.
I think one thing you also have to remember is it's not only the hands-on keyboard guy, it's the guys at the top. Because, hey, you know what, boots on the ground person, the IT side might fight technology, fight security, because it makes their job harder.
It does.
But when you have the guy at the top who says, hey, you know what, we need to actually make this more secure, it helps things go along a lot of ways. It helps set that culture so everybody actually follows that leader.
And your check will be in the mail, Dan. Thanks for making my next point. Because the hardest part of this, and I really got to stop giving my password. It's about bridging the gap between the seasons. Dan makes a good call. It does come from the top because you get your money from the top. So I will in part walk you through how to start this with zero budget, because again, this is how Romeo started it. He literally, in my opinion, was probably given a nod. Okay, sure, have some money, go try this. In the back of their minds, they're probably thinking it's not going to work, so I'm not really going to worry about it. He proved them wrong, walks out the door, builds his own company. So how do we do that? How do we make culture the absolute key of this thing? And it is through the communication. You want these people as your partners, because at the end of the day, they're the ones giving you the money, but you've got to show them how to do the work, right? The board puts security as a top line. When you don't have connections into that, it's very hard to make that sales pitch. You have to be part technical, part salesperson in order to get them swung into this thing. Because the mindset is a growth mindset, if we think about it. And if we think about it from a threat modeling perspective, it's one of my things that I love doing. You can threat model any kind of scenario. You can threat model the Wi-Fi network in your house. You can threat model your house. You walk out the door every day, you're at risk because you could slip, fall, get hit. Those are all threat modeling in the mindsets. You can walk into business and get an email from Ticketmaster. No, you didn't get tickets to the concert this weekend. Your data's been breached and it's on the dark web. So look up Troy Hunt's website, see if you've been pwned, right? It's the mindset from that. Because, and one of the quotes that I love from Bruce Schneier is, this involves thinking about how things can fail. But you want to be careful, because you don't want to pitch this from the point of, we're always going to fail, but we're going to think about how we're going to use failure as a lessons learned, as a lessons forward. It's a quick show of hands. Who here is still dealing with what happened last week in CrowdStrike, right? Who here by some odd chance has never heard of CrowdStrike? Who here wishes they'd never heard of CrowdStrike? Yeah, exactly. It's a very painful thing, because that was one of those oops moments. And I'm going to tell you something, folks, that's not a wake-up call. Sorry, you're too late in the game. The wake-up call came decades ago when Cliff Stoll found hackers and spies from other countries coming through the phone lines of all things, getting into our government institutions. That was the wake-up call. Last week was the oh shit moment. We didn't listen, and look what's happened now. And it's only going to get worse, because we're not including everybody to train these people. So how do we get that done? And I love Adam Savage. God, this guy's so cool. But we think about failure always being an option. It's not just that failure is always an option. It's that what happens when you don't pay attention to the failures. Ironically, this show came out before there actually was a Space Force. Creation, I don't know. It sure seemed to be coincidental. First, we have a funny show. No, we actually have a Space Force. But look what happens. So because of things like CrowdStrike, and don't get into the blame game here, okay? This really is about how did we not do a proper enough backup, and did we really vet the fact that we pulled in some patches and maybe left that auto update thing on? I hate doing that. But in some cases, that was the instance. Oh yeah, sure, it's from CrowdStrike. We can trust that. Go and shove that in. Oh shit. That's exactly what happens. So if you think about that from how do we take these lessons learned? How do we build upon that? These are actually the use cases that have now written themselves for us, right? Because let's face it, when left to their own devices, as Timothy first said, people will do what they want to do. They do the easiest. If you ever worked with a team of software developers and you're trying to insist upon the fact that they need to scan their software, test their software, write use cases for their software, vet it before they push it to production, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because at some point, it's noise to them. They want you to get out of their face because they got stuff to push out the door. It's very hard to sell them on that. Why? Because that's an on the side of their desk initiative. And if you look at their backlogs, they're going to be like, that's cute. Then they'll give you the finger when you walk out the door because you don't have time for this. So changing the mindset, changing the dialogue really comes back to culture, because when we think about what culture is, it's a shared values. Why are we in this game? Because we're tired of the bad guys making our lives miserable. Why are we doing this, right? Because we all need to make it from the perspective of shared thinking. Cloud security. We all know about what it takes to secure our cloud. We share this. Now we're using that same vocabulary, right? These are starting points you can use to start selling this kind of program, because at the end of the day, the people who will pay your budgets are going to ask you the why. What's the value? You have to be able to prep their minds to understand, I'm not just giving you smoke and mirrors. I'm not just looking for another line item in the budget. I'm trying to help you understand why this is going to become a problem, so we all have an input to this, because their approach will come down to the same thing. You want these people helping to be your champions. You want them to support your programs. So let me ask you a riddle here real quick. I had to put this in clean because my daughter actually built this deck. So I had to use the clean version of this phrase. But seriously, what's the difference between science and goofing around? Anybody know?
Methodology,
Excuse me?
methodology.
No. The difference between science and just goofing around is one simple thing. So whether or not you write it down.
Say it again?
It's whether or not you write it down. The difference between science and just goofing off is whether or not you write it down, because if it's not written down, you have no plan to work from. That is where security programs generally fail, because it winds up being a bunch of people sitting around a room talking about it, but nobody's put pen to paper and designed an action plan, and nobody's involved the people who need to do it. So you can go sell it to the executives who will say, I like that. You can have some money in your budget. Come back and talk to me next quarter. Tell me how you're doing. So taking this from the path of how did I build this thing over and over again, it really goes from the idea to the iteration. Write it down. You don't have to start complex. In fact, if you do not have such a program in your organizations, don't try to boil the ocean. Pick one thing. And I'll tell you the one thing that will absolutely get you off the ground and running in just a minute, because it has been proven time and time again to be the most effective way of proving from a non-technical perspective where the value comes in. But in order to do that, you have to be able to build it. As they say, it takes a single step for 1,000 miles. You've got to be able to help people understand from a learning perspective. If you want to do cloud, that's great. There's lots of resources to start with. How do we work about securing our cloud? How do we move from that to applying it? What do we mean when we go into Amazon Web Services and we have to secure our S3 buckets? How do we apply that? It's always the most common breach, isn't it? Your S3 bucket just got pwned. How do we go from that to actually doing it? This is where the hands-on comes to it. Again, it's not a participation trophy, folks. This is the doing. It's not people sitting around talking about it. You have to do this. This is part of the speech that I always had to give to the executives. I need people who will actually do it and then leading, because the question was, well, how do we make leaders? Well, I'll show you how you make leaders. You're going to train them to be leaders. Because at the end of the day, though, you always have to be ready for the one thing that's most important, and that's rewarding. The hardest sell you have in any corporate environment is, how do you incentivize somebody? It's not money. I hate to tell you, you can try to offer money, but that runway is short. Am I right, pilot? Because when the money runs out, so does your reward incentive. So how do you get to that point? It's recognition. You want to make sure that they're recognized. You as a leader should be getting out of the way of your people, letting them have the limelight. How do you do that? Because you want to make sure that with those great ideas, people will raise their hands and come forward. You want to reward them for that. So how do we walk down this path? Let me tell you how I started out with this idea and built it. In the applying, you pick what's easiest to do first. Threat modeling is actually not a very hard hurdle to get past. Why? Because you don't need to have all the pieces of the puzzle in place to begin doing it. If you're an organization running agile, you're running sprints, you can inject yourself into the sprint cycle. In fact, I would recommend you do that. Your architects are going to be like, dude, I do not have time to pull down 35 gigs of an architecture diagram of our entire payroll system and sit there and walk you through it. You know what? That's a fair call out because that's a heck of a lot of data paths to walk through. How about we talk about the next update you're going to do in 3 weeks? Can we talk about what's coming out in release? Sure, absolutely. Well, let's model that. Start with those small pieces. Adam Shostak, who is the godfather of threat modeling, literally built a 4-question system that actually helps. And you can repeat this. In fact, it's out in the open space. You can use this yourself. I did this. You first start by focusing. What is the thing we're working on? That's not meant to be a general question. That's meant to be specific. We're going to work on the next sprint release. What's in that sprint release? Let's work on that. Oh, we're going to update our IAM. We're going to use MFA. Perfect. What could go wrong? Right? Everything. When can it go wrong? At any time. So what are we going to do about it? Those questions generate your backlog, generate your ideas. Now, what you want to do, remember I said the difference between science and goofing around, is you want those to be written down. That's actually the intent of doing threat modeling. Write down the problems that you come up with. Many will be valid, some will not be, but it doesn't matter because you're eliminating problems that you have in that. As you advance and become more able to handle undo things, you can look at vulnerability research. This is actually just taking your ethical hackers and turning them loose on problems that are coming through the public space. Now, some people call it a bug bounty, but remember what I said, that runway short. Now, if you have unlimited cash for stuff like that, please come talk to me. I might send you my CV. Most organizations don't. And so bug bounties are good in their space, but the problem is when the money runs out, you can't reward people. So from a vulnerability research, you've got to be able to couch this as, listen, you're doing a great thing for it, and we'll recognize you. And then you need to make the argument when it comes time for that performance review, these people get properly recognized. It does work. I've seen it work. I've helped make it work. More advanced stuff. If you get into advanced automated security scanning, everybody's into the cloud now. You're also probably in DevOps or some other kind of automated. If you're not baking in your automation process into that, start, but you write it down. SOC, yes, sir. All of that has a very valuable output. That's called your logging. So you can take these things. Now, how do you build it into a program? The way that I did it was I started at the beginning. Way too many animations in here. You build it incrementally. So a couple of organizations ago, I'll say, when I was there, we started by using GitHub repos. We did that because everything was in GitHub. But then we said, well, how are we going to prove what people are doing is actually making the value? So we said, we'll start with threat modeling. And your requirement is really very simple. Get as much of the architecture diagram that you can for your particular application and threat model it. If you don't know how, we'll train you. All you need to do is start with the data flow diagram and start mapping out the possibilities. Now save that. That's an artifact. Cha-ching, that's a credit to your exam, to your work. Why that makes a difference is because they're already doing it as part of their job. You did not add more work to their workload. You simply stood in there and said, let's help you get that documented. Now let's stick that over here in this GitHub repo so we have evidence of where it's at. So without making their workload heavier, that's the first pushback, you've literally given them a way to show their work. This will eventually build into another system, and I'll explain in just a second. As they start getting more advanced, you start moving on to that. Well, let's do more than threat modeling. Let's do vulnerability scanning. Let's go take what we're getting in our threat feeds. Are we finding any of that in there? Can we document what the fixes are going to be? Great. Document it. Save that. What are we going to do about it? We're going to put that into our backlog. That becomes a little more advanced. Can you research how to fix that? You have an idea? Perfect. What's the fix? Document that. Save that. As they start doing these things, You're literally just putting visibility on the work they're already doing, and you're giving them a way to be recognized for, because when they get to the more advanced stuff, oh, wow, well, how did we miss the CrowdStrike thing? Well, let's go look at our patch flow. Let's go look at the systems that were affected. These are more advanced topics. You want your more senior people to do it. When they're finished with that, you now actually have people who will train the others. This is how Romeo built his system. He literally followed a martial arts method, built it from the white belts to the black belts. Who trains the white belts? The black belts. So your senior people who have worked hard to show this stuff and document it, written it down, now have something to show the junior people. You literally just created a self-sustaining system within that without doing any additional extra work other than just documenting the flow. It works. You get them to repeat it. All it requires is oversight and maintenance, because at the end of the day, it all goes back to the source code, right? We all wind up back at the source code. If you're too young to remember this, this is the Matrix. That's Neo standing at the machine city. It all has to flow back to the code. You can automate this. I did it in GitHub. It works slick. You can do it in ASDO. Whatever system you have for tracking your stuff, you can now literally build that, pump that back into there. Now you have a system that's actually building backlog items. Why is this a big thing? Because since it all goes back to the source code of it, you've built your artifacts, you've built the system that will actually reflect that, so you can work your logs. The only thing that's left from that is just a little bit of oversight. What we did was we set up a pull request system, so when people submitted their artifacts, when they submitted their threat model, I've just completed my threat model of my system. Great. Now the people who are going to review that are going to go through, make sure that everything was caught, everything was documented, every flaw that you found or highlighted has a backlog item to put in a fix to it. It's up to the team to decide what's the severity. At that point, you stay out of it. And this is what you should be. Ask anybody who's an agile. The last person you want in an agile meeting is the product owner, because they mess up everything. And if anybody's a product owner, I'm sorry, but that's what they will tell you. Get out of the room, let the devs figure it out. You've got a system for them to prioritize it. So all you need to do now at this point is work on a way to recognize them. We use Credly. And it was when I had the system in place, baked, and fully working, I was able to actually go back to the executives and say, now that the system works and is repeatable, all I would like to do is have a little bit of budget so we can go buy Credly licenses. We would like to give these people the recognition they deserve, they've earned. They can have a little badge, pop it under the LinkedIn profile, so they can carry it with them. It became a wash, rinse, repeat. Somebody else said, hey, I'd like to move on to threat modeling, and I'd like to actually start taking some of these vulns that we're seeing in the wild and look at 0 days. Perfect. How are you going to do that? How are you going to start out simple enough so somebody who doesn't know about it can learn? How are you going to teach it? They literally built that into it. Another person came up and said, how about if we do business process engineering? Okay, I'm good with that. Can you make a system that'll work from the novice to the expert? She built an entire business process re-engineering system. Now they actually worked on actually improving the flows of that. It's the recognitions that's the key. When you recognize people, you publicly recognize them. The money's a nice incentive. Sure, you can build that in, and you absolutely should make sure that you're looking at that when it comes to be review time. What did you do that was above the mark? You jumped into this program. You reduced our risk. It makes that argument a lot easier going back to your execs and say, why do you need more bonus money next time? Because look at all these people's work. Look what they did to take our risk portfolio down. Should that make your accountants happy? It absolutely should, because now we're less vulnerable. You can do this again and again and again. The cost can be very low. It really can. Credly, I think actually they changed the name now. Somebody else bought them, but there's similar systems. It's not expensive per person if you pitch it that way. If we say it's only going to cost maybe $3 to $5 per person per badge, that's pocket change to most budget owners. Oh, but that's all it cost me? Sure. What do I sign? You want a credit card? I'll give you my P card. Go buy it. Go put it in place. The system works. It works for a reason, but here's the action call. If you're not doing this in your organizations, you need to be doing this in your organizations. You need to be getting the people at the ground, talking to the people who make the difference on this. Why? Because this is how you get everybody's hand in this model. You get them working with that. And that's the end of my talk. So My takeaway is, if you're not doing this in your organization, now's the time to start. Like I said, last week wasn't a wake-up call. That was 40 years ago. Last week was, you better be moving now. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Are there any questions to Eric or to the CSA board?
Eric, so obviously you've spent a lot of time like putting these training programs and cultural shift program into place. What are some of the common pitfalls that people might encounter when trying to, repeat this as their own organization, or maybe even what are some of the stories of minor or bigger than that failures that you encountered that you'd be willing to share?
The biggest challenge is always the money and finding the advocates who are going to partner with you, because in the initial phases, it really is off the side of your desk. When you're the one who has the passion for it, your day-to-day BAU work's got to get done. You're going to have to spend the extra time, extra hours, and you're going to have to really convince others who say, yeah, I believe in your dream. That's fine. You mind meeting this afternoon after work? I'll buy you a beer on the weekend. You're going to have to get those people's involvements in that. That's the hardest part of the whole thing. If they don't see the vision, you didn't do a good enough job explaining it to them. One of the biggest challenges that we had initially was letting them pitch to the senior IT team that we needed to move away from public GitHub to enterprise, because we needed additional features that only GitHub Enterprise at the time offered, which meant I'm asking you for more money. I know that's not cheap. Can we figure out a way that the rest of the organization will benefit from that, so we get this little small 10% benefit from it? That one turned into a little bit of an easier sell when the devs and the engineers and the architects said, oh, we'd like to use that. Then suddenly it became several voices saying, you know what, I'd like to have that. Can we have that? It wasn't just me saying it's a good idea. All of a sudden the engineering community stood up and said, yeah, we'd absolutely like to have this. It was a little harder for them to say no, because they didn't want people leaving them with a company that would not be very forward thinking in there. The hardest pitch of the whole thing, though, was going to the CSA when it was time to ask for actual money to do something with it. That was probably one of the most nerve-wracking discussions that I had. He flew me up. Why is that? Because this gentleman needed to see the potential in the reduction of risk and how it would communicate to dollars avoided being lost, which meant I had to really think like an accountant, and I'm not an accountant. My wife's a CPA. I'm not. So I had to go. I had to get accurate numbers. And that was probably the hardest part, because a lot of that information wasn't available to somebody to me at my level at that time. That's management information. That's not openly available information. So I will admit, yeah, I had to social engineer a couple people.
Quantitative risk analysis is hard. It's a much harder problem than I think most people probably give it credit for.
Well, the first thing that I had to also admit to is, I said, look, I probably got these numbers wrong, and I'll tell you that right now. I'm almost certain they're wrong. So the best thing I can tell you is it's just a crapshoot and a guess. You know more about that than I do, sir. You closer to the budget lines. Here's my estimated opinion of what it could give us in reduction. And he's like, that's fair. It's wrong, but it's fair.
Hey, Eric, to that point, talking about risk reduction and having verifiable numbers that may or may not be verifiable. When you had that conversation, what were some of the numbers that you spoke to? And is there a way for you to be able to, and at this point, show the reduction in risk that your organization was able to achieve by implementing these programs?
Absolutely. So one of the board metrics was what was coming out of our vulnerability scans. Total number of applications we were scanning, total number of problems that we had categorized by criticals, highs, mediums, lows, how many of those were being remediated, how long did it take to remediate them, This was all raw stuff before we had a program going into this. What are we facing right now? How long is it taking to close these flaws? What kind of flaws are we having? Are we seeing these flaws repeat themselves? That actually had to be eliminated. That part I could do because at the time that product kept popping a lot of false positives and they kept showing up in the report. So I just had to go take all those out. I said, ignore the false positives because we know we crossed those off the list. What were the real problems we dealt with? And so that chart I took to him, I said, here's what we're facing right now with nothing else but people going willy-nilly trying to run their own programs and scan them. Here's the potential we could have with threat modeling by going in and addressing some of these flaws. We stand to reduce, and I just gave him a number that I pulled out of the back and said it could be anywhere between 0 and 20% reduction, depending upon how fast and advanced they are. And he's like, I'll take that. I had to go back and prove it. We didn't quite hit 20%, but we had far more than 0 in doing that. And that was enough to say, you know what? You've actually shown me that you can do an improvement. All he wanted to see was, could the process improve the initiative? Do we actually get a reduction in flaws? And yes, we did, because fortunately, the people who are doing the threat modeling took the same classes that I did. And they're like, oh, we get it. Now we can go and cross these off the list. Here's how much we just got off our plate.
You already mentioned the vulnerability scanning having a lot of false positives. One of the other things I found difficult to communicate to the executive levels, the fact that vulnerability scans ain't critical, they're based on the scores.
Yep.
They don't bring into account what risk management would do, which is bring in the business impact. Like, okay, I got a large, a highly, CDS score high, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad, terrible business thing if it has nothing to do with the business functions, right? Maybe it's a content delivery system, right? Who cares if there's a vulnerability on that? So anyway, I'm just curious, did you morph your environment to include that piece of impact analysis into your reports?
Yes, and because we were using a risk scoring method, which is a commonly available one, we didn't have a whole lot of trust in EPS at the time. At that time, it was still a little new, but the concept was still there. So we said, well, what they may call a 7.5 actually is not. It's only really about a 4. Why? Because we've got all these controls in place. Our firewall can pick these things up. It's less of a problem. We're not going to discount insider threat. In fact, we'll leave a pin beside that one because we should actually have something addressing that. So I said, here's the way we can address these things. So those metrics did not include those initially. We said we went with raw scores out of the vendor. The bonus to that was it exposed the vendor for just really how bad of a product they had. So I kind of got a twofer. They said, not really a lot of value out of them, are we? No, really, we're not. And I'd really like to be able to think maybe next year when the contract expires, going to somebody better. Okay, we'll have that discussion. So take it, you have to be just willing to admit, you know what, you don't know it all. And sometimes these things just don't work the way people do. CISOs need to hear that because there's too many gatekeepers between them and the actual real information.
So you've spoken a lot about agile and fully developed developer teams. How do you do that in a smaller company like that has like 4 people in their entire security division? Kind of, and again, most people are always stretched little things like,
Right.
hey, and there's some developers that love testing in production because that's how they fix problems. It's like talking about a backlog, hey, they just are fighting fire and fire. How do you spin that up when you're at a much smaller organization with much fewer resources than the structured threat model that you have?
What I do with threat modeling, especially when they come back and say, I don't have time to give you the whole thing, you've got to take it iteratively. Let's talk about the next release. Take it at a smaller approach. You're getting ready to put a new set of feature set in there. You can take that to a smaller approach, and then you're going to have to determine what's the bigger risk. And your business will tell you that. Because it's at the end of the day, you're going to go back to the business owner and say, okay, here's the problems that I see with this design. Here's the flaws that are going to come out of this thing. Now you tell me, since you're paying for this, do you want me to go fix this first, or do you need your important feature? Because I will tell you, in my opinion, if you ignore this, there's a potential for disaster.
So how mature is your threat modeling process in your organization?
How mature is it?
Yeah.
In my current one?
Yeah.
Actually, very mature.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
because we went global.
Okay, do you guys use any commercial tools and do
No.
you okay. How do you do that? It's a whiteboarding or
We start with whiteboarding. We start with questionnaires as the beginning because it's a process of discovery. And we ask them if the architects do happen to have the full diagram, that's great. You don't really need to have it. We'll take with what you got. And then if you'll let us sit in on the sprint meetings, we'll start it from there. We have a couple of teams who are like all in. We got the full end-to-end diagram. In fact, they're trying to iterate because it's so big, they can't go end to end. So they're taking it off in chunks. But we took that questionnaire, we took that method, we took the methodology as a framework, and then we built a train the trainer program. And so now for the regional leads, they each have the repeatable process in their areas so they can go sit down and we give them full access to us and say, if you have a question, if it doesn't make sense, pop a meeting on the calendar. We're happy to sit in and talk to you about it, give you some guidance. You can go back to your teams and
Okay.
develop that.
So no commercial tools, but you guys use Stride framework to ask
We
those
use
questions?
Stride.
Mhm.
We are moving towards attack trees.
Hmm.
And we are actually going to be start capitalizing upon AI as a way of doing that. It's at that point where getting the money is a little harder. So because we can do it from a process perspective, we've shown the value by showing the number of flaws. Right now, that has everybody in a good frame of mind because they're like, oh, you guys are actually finding crap. Yeah, we are. No criticals yet, but we're certainly finding a bunch of other flaws. And many of them are configurations. Some of them are business logic flows. That's really why we haven't tried to invest in a tool because there's too many business if-then scenarios that tools really can't get their head around. But we're going to take that. We're going to say, well, if we can somehow train an LLM to think like we want ours to think inside our org, there's the next juice. And that has gotten everybody's ears perked up.
To actually going to buy, to build your own model, or you're going to use the one
We're going to start building our own because buying means exposing us to risk of a tool and taking that vetting process into account. The one thing that makes them very nervous is the potential for leakage. And they would rather verify first before they trust.
So you said the fact modeling is material to your organization.
Yes.
So how did it become so pervasive and what you get?
It took the iterative process. We started it here in this country, in North America. It was questionnaire. Questionnaire was the easiest because it meant starting the conversations and getting interaction. From that point, it became more mature when we could actually now have access to enough of the systems. We know if they say, oh, we're going to go into Azure Kubernetes. We already know what to look for. It's literally copy and paste. Here's the things, if you don't have them in place, that you need to do immediately. What are you doing about them? Do you have them? Yes, no. For them, it's a lot faster because then they can simply go look, oh, I didn't turn that on. I have that, good, I'm covered. And when we set it up as a train the trainer, we literally trained our regionals to do the same thing. And they're actually creating their own templates of systems. So they know whatever they go into, here's what to expect. Here's what to anticipate. And they validate that with scanning. And we've been able to show our scans are coming right in line with what a threat modeling does. That's when you know you have a level of maturity. Your scans are picking up the stuff that your threat modelers are. That's a good thing. What we're hoping for is to hit the golden nugget and our threat modelers find something the scanners miss. Because boy, am I going to have a heyday with the vendor. I want to say, you missed it. Not hardening. This is more understanding what the system is. Hardening is what you do when you find problems. But you want to understand, what is your system using? It starts with best practices, then it also starts with understanding the data. Again, that's the follow-on. Okay, you say you're running an IAM system. Are you processing it to a content delivery network, or are you processing it to something that's got sensitive data or controlled data? Do you have PCI in the mix somewhere? Because that's a whole nother set of discussions. Well, if they understand PCI DSS4, which most of them don't. At that
I
point,
think one of the unique things about what you're doing, Eric, is that you work very closely with the DevOps community.
Yes.
And so software development lifecycle is a key piece of that. Whereas, you know, if you're in a corporate information security your department, you might have to contextualize a lot of what Erica's talking about for system development lifecycle, right? As it pertains to your corporate infrastructure and things that you're bringing in, you know, for example, maybe you have system administrators who like to bring in open source tools and use them, you know, and you could easily use that as, let's say, advanced IP scanner. Why would anybody ever use that, you know, in the corporate IT environment? Oh, well, we don't have good documentation for what our IP ranges are and what systems live in our IP ranges. Well, you could do some threat modeling around, well, what could go wrong by having that installed on servers, you know, across the environment when it's not needed. Or the classic one is Nmap.
Yep.
Right? Or Wireshark, right? What's wrong with having WinPCAP installed on servers when it's not in use? Well, it can be used for malicious purposes to capture network traffic, right? So you can do threat modeling around those kinds of administrative tools. So I guess I would just, you know, say like some of what you heard from Eric tonight may need to be like contextualized for your your SDLC instead of secure software development lifecycle. But, you know, Monica, to your point, it's a life cycle, right? So you're doing things on the front end, you're also doing things on the back end, and that applies to your vulnerability management life cycle as well.
I'm kind of curious what Robert is going to present in the next meeting, because their product are building threat investigation modules and discovering PIIs as well. So I'm just kind of curious about that too.
Well, it's an interesting segue because we got a gentleman that says we heart open source. Yeah. I will just tell you now, don't slam the door shut, but instead create a path in and a path out. Every organization I've been into has the same problem. If you've written anything in Node, you know, the moment you kick off NPM, you don't get 4,000 or 5,000 things, you get 40 or 50,000 things by the time you count the trees. It makes it run, but it's that exponential factor of risk you just sucked into the organization. Congratulations. How many backdoors you just load? You don't know. So you have to be able to think of it from that perspective, the systems perspective. Okay, I don't want my developers to not use stuff that they find that's good and valid, but I also don't want to give them just willy-nilly access to the open internet too. So how can we take advantage of something? And it's not an endorsement, it's just a system I'm familiar with, but Artifactory as a good repository. You can actually take a threat modeling perspective to that and say, do we have a controlled gated system? If you want to pull it in, thou must do Artifactory. Well, who's going to perform oversight on that? We did a similar thing at my former organization where we wanted them to do that. And so those pull requests to come in said, I'd like to use this or that library. I'm going to go threat model that. Great. Walk through that process and analyze it. Okay, it looks good, passes our policies. Now it can go over to the repository team. They can put it in. You send it out as a broadcast to the engineering community. If you want to use this library, here's your link. You can pull this down, safely use it, do your testing and due diligence. You know, don't just blindly apply it. Blue screen of death. Go test it, validate it. Now you have a safe gate to do that. You can actually use that as a system to also encourage, hey, you know what? We could actually use this and reward people for doing that. You're doing the right thing. So you can turn a system like that into a rewards-based system. Congratulations. You just saved us from X number of flaws. That's a metric you can actually validate. How many potential problems did we avoid by getting the wrong version of log4j pulled in versus the right version of log4j? And oh, by the way, I went ahead and made sure the firewall team blocked these 3 functions that typically get exploited. You're welcome very much. You know, you can couch it like that. That's a system that you have people who can do that. You can teach them how to do it. That pays far bigger benefits when they get the spotlight for doing that than any kind of bonus ever will, because the bonus is temporary. The recognition is permanent.
Just in case if anyone wondering wants to know more about threat modeling, there's nothing to do with CSA, but there's what is called threatmodelingconnect.com. If you please go check it out. There are like 40 co-founders of that, and I happen to be one of them. Chris Romeo was one of them.
So is Showstack.
Showstack is, you know, beyond the co-founders of he's the godfather of threat modeling.
Yes, he is.
But there's a lot of content, a lot of articles, a lot of lot of documentation out there. There's a tool that I published there as well. There's tons of information about threat modeling there. but it's run by Iris Risk. Iris Risk is a commercial vendor, it's European-based Spain, but they really help you understand threat modeling, not to make it as a marketing pitch. If anyone is interested in threat modeling.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I just attended a webinar yesterday. Audrey Long, who is a Microsoft senior engineer, actually gave a talk on how there's a potential for Azure AI become integrated threat modeling. And I thought that's actually very cool. I like that. So I got a lot of takeaways from that one, and I'm spinning up a couple of ideas I've got internally. I like stuff like that, and I think that's a great value add. I think your questionnaire is also published somewhere on the open web.
Yeah, Threat Modeling
Yeah,
Connect. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So he actually built an Excel file that you can literally walk through and by process of selection and elimination, understand what you need to work through. It's a great starter. If you don't have any place to start, it is a great way to get yourself primed and up and running. And it's I believe you're still updating it.
There is a recording there as well, a workshop kind of thing, 2 hours video as well there, if you want to take a look at it. Go to threatmodeling.com, connect.com, but it has nothing to do with CSA actually.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's an interesting. But it is a good starter point.
I have a question about, the mindset. You mentioned in one of your slides, that the ideal or successful mindset to pretty much.
I'm sorry, the idea what?
The idea of having a successful mindset in the organization supported by 3 levels or components, values, thinking, and approach. I believe so.
Yeah.
So which one do you think, or do you need wins in all 3? Which one, like, would you want to tackle first to gain I guess the trust or the conviction of the organization?
The values.
Yeah. values.
Always start with values. What does the company value the most? It should be written in the mission statement, and it should be preached by the C-suite. If it's not, you might want to consider it an organization because they're not living what they say they are. Start with values first, because the way that you couch this is what I call the Dr. Pepper method. Don't you want to avoid risk too? Of course you do. Anybody that says no is blind and lying. No, of course they want to avoid risk. So your values are protect our company assets. I have an idea for how we can do that.
And I guess a follow-up on that, as far as percentage, in general, about your experience, how many organizations resist to that, like change their values you mentioned and kind of own it? Is it easy? Like, I know you mentioned CISO are very much
Yeah.
hard to convince, but usually it's not only one person. It might actually touch on the CEO as well and CFO, usually with data, financial data.
If your company has one, yes. Not all do. Some don't. They have like this by consensus thing. It's a bunch of actuaries that run it. They don't have a CFO. Some companies do though. I like to do it with a CISO because they're at the crux of understanding what's the risk to the organizations. They're also accountable for it as well. The board always fries the CISO every stinking time something goes wrong. It doesn't matter if they were there when a problem happened or if they come into it. If it's something that happened 30 years ago, it's their head in the news every single time. Making them your ally makes it easier because for the most part, anybody at that level doesn't know you from Adam's house cat. They don't, because you don't talk to them every day. You need that person as your advocate. That person is also going to give you really valuable feedback as to what you need to bring forward for them to have as an argument. Sharing the values, avoiding the risk, reducing the cost of stuff. And you can also take it from the perspective of why is threat modeling going to help us? Because one of the things that it absolutely will expose is tech debt. And when you can show that you can reduce that, now you make the accountants very happy because you're spending less money. You'll pay us, but you don't have to buy this old junk and maintain it because we're going to find a way to get rid of it for you. You start making heroes. Yes.
One of the challenges that I've been coming across recently is how do you keep track of this over time? Like, how do you create like a sort of record of this that's visible to other people on the team? When it comes to threat modeling, like how can you show improvement over time? And is there a way that you visualize it so that people can see that risk or see those threats disappearing as you're actually like improving your posture. with
Yeah,
the
well,
action.
obviously write it down. That's the
Yeah.
first thing. Where do you put it? Like my example with the GitHub repository. So as you're going through and you're finding flaws, you want to track those. Put it in a dashboard. To use Power BI, to use some kind of dashboard. You can literally take those statistics, collect them, and reflect those upwards. That's what we do. That's what every organization we've always taken that. That's what they want to see. They want to see the number of problems you found and how are they classified. Because then the next step is, okay, what's going to be the reduction? What's the burn down? Over time, that's where you want to make sure your team is driving towards. By the next quarter, that needs to drop. You can take the biggest problem or you can make a whole bunch of small ones. Either way, it'll drop. Keep doing that as a cycle repeating pattern. But why? Because people who matter will see that and that's visible to them. You're making improvements. Good. Keep improving. Keep iterating. You'll screw it up the first couple of cycles. That's fine. Everybody does. I did. But by even showing a minimal drop shows that you're trending in the right direction. And if you're not looking at what the public scoring agencies are blasting you with, which by the way, they hit everybody, annoying as it is, you need to fold that into your process. Because just like there's a credit score for XFAX TransUnion or the food and safety scores, and you wouldn't ever, I hope, walk into a place that was a low 90 or below, because that's Tomaine just waiting to take you out. They're doing the same thing to organizations and companies without the permission.
B's better. B's better. B's best.
Okay. I'll dance at your funeral.
Good for the immune system.
Yeah. Only if you've had 1,000 shots like you have. But that's probably the one miss that people don't anticipate. It was something I had to learn from me too. I did not realize people were doing this. And then the bigger shock was I did not realize I can't change that. I can't force them down a rabbit hole and say, you can't do that to me. Because they're like, you can't do a thing to me, buddy. I got a model that sells and people buy my model from me. I'm putting you on public blast. So what do? You have to respond to that. And you can build that into that. That's a harder thing to do because you don't have any control over it. So you are highly reactive. But that alone is the impetus to say, if I can get you a program built that I can stay at least on top of it, if not get ahead of it, isn't that worth some investment in a program that will help? That's kind of a reverse logic you're throwing off because if they say no, they just expose themselves to the fact they don't care about risk. So that's how you social engineer your C-suite. Is the moment they say no and it's public knowledge, like, oh, you didn't take that step when you knew about it? Auditors love those questions. Oh, you knew about that flaw. What'd you do about it? Oh, we just ignored it.
That's what the risk registry is for.
Yep.
Nothing changes an executive's mindset than signature that says, I, on behalf of this company,
Said this
accept
is
this
fine.
risk.
Yep.
So do your organization have a risk registry?
Every company I've ever worked for, if they didn't have it, they had it before I left.
Really?
Yeah, everyone.
Okay. Not every organization that I worked had it.
I don't know, if ever get familiar with organizational change management frameworks. Okay, great. I mean, the key there is that it's not just the bat, paying somebody's mind, showing them, you don't do this, this is going to happen, and it's undoable. The other approach is the influencing stuff. Getting them to come to the same conclusion that you want them to get to, and then have them think it's their idea. And
Called
nothing is more
diplomacy.
powerful than gaining, not just an advocate now, but an evangelist.
Yep.
Because it's their idea. You step away, you go down the next path, and you see this tumble for you, for your path. That is, to me, I've been doing stuff like this. Wait, I don't want to say how long, for a long time. And I've done the back, and I've done everything in between. gaining adoption through them thinking it's their idea has always been the easiest and quickest path I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And that is the textbook definition of diplomacy,
yeah.
getting the other person to take your idea, think it's their own, and executing it.
You present them with a line of thinking, so they can think it through themselves. Is that the approach?
Yes, there's a lot of, think about it, you present the data, right? And you have a brainstorming session. Put in leading questions.
Yes.
And they come to, you'll see the wheels turn, right? And if they say something that's really kind of off kilter, say, all right, I need some clarification. I don't quite get that, right? The whole, again, it's all about how you present the idea and discuss it with them. And I'm telling you, unless they're a complete idiot, they are going to come to the conclusion you're driving for, because number one, you should be driving towards a conclusion unless it's the right one in the first place. So it's usually it's not a hard thing to do, because it's just getting people to understand the same thing. Sometimes it takes a lot more questions and leading conversations to get them to that. But once they do, I'll tell you, in fact, those ones that take the longest, they're the ones that are the best in the end, because they're convinced and they're gonna push it through now.
Yep.
Now,
They
the
won't
downside of that is you've achieved your goal, yes. The downside is that no one will tend to know that you were even involved.
Well, also, you gotta make sure your idea is the right one too.
Yeah, well, that's
There's
what I'm
no,
saying, yeah.
if you convince the wrong person of the wrong thing,
Yeah.
and they push it, they muscle it through.
But that's where the back end data comes in, right? We're
Yeah.
talking about. You have to have the data in the first place to show where we're gonna go, and now you're showing them, here's the decrease, or here's the increase, whatever the positive thing is. You're showing them, and also now you're giving, so again, it feeds everybody. I personally use a very simple formula for success. And it's just, IT tends to like projects in effort, benefit minus effort. That's it. You gotta times that by adoption. Because you could have the best project with the best return on investment there could be. But if the people aren't gonna use it, or sponsors aren't going to deal with it, it's worthless. Especially when the next executive comes along and wipes it clean because it wasn't adopted.
And it wasn't their idea.
And it wasn't their idea. Adoption is all about their idea. Oh, I love that. Okay, we'll go down that path.
Yeah.
It is the simplest and best approach. You
And-
just don't get the most recognition.
That's when you find a way to repackage an old idea into a new one, right?
Well, what comes along with that, though, is timing in the budget cycle. Don't ever launch this in the last half of the year.
Right.
Because your money's spent. You have zero chance, because they're like, that's cute. Talk to us at the opening of the next cycle, and they'll forget who you were. You've lost all that momentum, pumping everybody up, because there's $0. They've given you a little bit of time to listen to you, and like, okay, that's cute. You can see yourself out now.
Yeah, I would start planning now,
Yep.
propose in October
Correct.
to get on the budget for January 1.
Right, because by February, you want at least some little line item there when they open up that budget.
And never let any disaster go to waste.
Oh, absolutely not. Last week's proof of that, right?
You gotta be careful with that, though. You don't want to be the boy who cried for it.
No, but when you take that and tie it into something that would be relevant to your current situation.
Yep.
It's like,
Like, if you know there's a weakness, like, and you're looking for an opening to actually bring it up and like talk about it. Right. Then if you relate it to what's happening in the news, they're gonna be like, I guess you're right. Like, we probably should do something about that thing we know about, but we've been kind of dragging our feet on it.
If it's external, I would recommend an RCA for something like that, where CrowdStrike, for example, root cause analysis. If it's an internal incident, then you really need to let the dust settle before you can have a emotionally detached conversation. And lessons learned, a month, 2 months after, where it's still relatively fresh. I wouldn't not let the whole quarter go by before you do lessons learned, but you do want to actually, schedule out, okay, things have started to calm down with this particular whatever incident or event or whatever. Now we're going to schedule out a lessons learned like 4 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now, maybe even 2 weeks from now, where you can have sit down at the table and put thick skins on and have a conversation about what went wrong, and how we keep it from happening again. 5 whys, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. If it's an internal disaster, standard problem management is the way to go. And you're not the evangelist or, you know, it's just standard practice, follow that standard practice and you just go then. And when I say never let a disaster, it's always the other guy. Right?
But you know what, security is a black hole for money, always has been.
It always will be.
What?
It always will be.
Yeah, but when you have that disaster, especially if you go, hey, we can counteract this, we can proactive, yes, you're spending $1 million, but you know what? When you don't spend $1 million, CrowdStrike costs your business 10 million. So when we talk about return on our investment, it's like if a pound of prevention is worth an ounce of whatever, something like that. The sooner we can correct that issue, again, like Eric, you were saying, in the development pipeline, hey, if we can get this done before we push the application out, it's a lot easier than throwing a patch afterwards, especially when it's on a shared server.
There was actually a lot of discussion in LinkedIn on this general topic. It just comes down to this. The malicious entities are a for-profit business model, and we are an expense.
Right.
That's it, you know, I mean, and that disparity is always going to be a problem.
Yeah,
Always.
I think that's true from an accounting perspective, but that narrative has really hurt our industry a lot. And I used to work, you know, I was fortunate, we were a huge company, so I used to work with our CFO. And I saw us, had this relationship with him where he knew I used to tell me, you know, we want to be frugal, but we don't want to be cheap. And so
There's a
like,
difference.
there's that balance, right? So, you know, I was just curious what you were talking about. It says 5.4 billion just for the Fortune 500 in this country. So, you know, IT is a cost center, yeah, from an accounting standpoint, but if we don't change that narrative a little bit, it's going to cost a lot more in the long run.
I think the only reason that narrative has succeeded, and I agree it has, for, you know, we've been made as technologists, we've been brainwashed to adopt that mindset. I'm a cost center, right?
Sure.
I think that the major malfunction with that narrative and the major downfall of that narrative is that nowadays every single company is technology driven. So it's not an expense, it's an investment that has a return.
Yeah.
And part of the problem that we have as technologists, and part of what I would challenge anybody who's in this room that's a senior, you know, in the field and above to push yourself to do, is to expand your business lexicon and your business knowledge. Because when you can flip the equation, you can flip the script, and then that narrative doesn't stand anymore. Look, you want to save money on cyber liability insurance, you want to transfer risk, how about we just mitigate the risk to begin with?
Yep.
And you'll also save money on your cyber liability insurance policy. Let me show the equation for that. We can save 10% on our cyber liability policy by doing X, Y, and Z. And, oh, guess what? We're all gonna sleep better at night because we have a much lower chance of actually getting breached at the end of the day, right? So that's the kind of conversation that, you know, wins you a seat at the table, and that you have to be able to have the talking points for that, right? And I think it is a challenge because, you know, the actuaries or the CFOs or the controllers are gonna be saying, well, justify this budget to me. And that's when we have to be able to say, well, let me show you, paint the bigger picture for you. We do this, this, and this, and then this, and this will be lower. Oh, and by the way, you know, we're actually all gonna have a bit greater peace of mind. And actually what's way more important than the money is an emotional connection.
Yeah.
Guess who doesn't want to get woken up in the middle of the night
The
when there's a
CEO.
breach and we've got to call an insurance company? The CEO, but also the CFO does not want to get a phone call in the middle of the night because you have to reach out to cyber liability to make a claim. And they
that's-
need to be involved when that happens, so that they do not want to get that phone call.
And that's part of the selling point too, when they say, why should we do this? You're investing in your employees. And what I said, the runway's short when you want to do it with cash, But it's real long when you invest in your employees, you give them recognition. Because that generates people that'll stick around.
Yeah.
There's your rub. Why do we want to do this? Because we're investing in our people and they will stay involved. The more that you get out of their way and let them shine like that, like Job said, you hire smart people to tell us what to do.
Yeah,
You gotta
nothing
recognize
hurts a company faster than loss of employee faith and attrition. Or massive brand reputational damage, right? So it could come from within, it can come from without, but. I mean, that's a great point. Like if you get breached and all of your employee data is smattered all over the internet, how does that make your employees feel about coming to work the next day? You know?
Not even,
Not
give you
very
an
good.
example, then insider threats can come from disgruntled employees.
Yeah, we're a mishire to a security awareness training company.
Somebody from North Korea, maybe.
Yeah,
That's scary. The fact
Oh,
that-
too soon. I'm sorry.
no, like I said,
That's perfect. Yeah,
that's
like,
not the
wait.
wake up call, that's the oh shit moment. Whoops, miss.
Yeah, so allow me to share a different perspective here. So I practice law, intellectual property law, used to work for ILM before. Would you call the legal team as the black hole? Right? The purpose of legal team is to keep the business out of trouble. Exactly the same thing what cybersecurity team is doing. Why are we struggling so much to convince senior leadership or C-staff for the same thing? It's exactly the same thing, right? To keep you out of the headlines, to keep you out of trouble, to avoid phone calls at night, and all those things, right? Check mark. We do exactly same things.
I call the legal team the necessary evil.
Yep.
You're the pit bulls that we have to pull out when it's time to go after somebody and bite down hard. A long time ago, I got sucked into a situation. It was an insider issue. And there was a lot of problems that got spilled out of that. And because none of us knew what that meant legally, we had to sit down with senior legal counsel. How do we couch this? It's gonna go public. How are we gonna get the story? It shouldn't be us in front of it, but how are we gonna give the right data so the CEO knows the facts as we know them? And how is that gonna be scripted? It can't be us trying to tell the story because we don't know the legalities. We sat down with the legal counsel. Tell me what you know. And I'll tell you what has to be done. At that point, that's a partnership. Yeah, it's absolutely necessary. That's why I say it's a necessary. That's the scripted knowledge based upon education and experience to knows what happens. You got to file cyber reliability. Oh crap! I'm not going to be the one to give that talk.
Well, I would call them cybersecurity is a necessary angel. Right, if you're talking.
If you want to sell it like that, yeah, but you got to work up to that point before you can go knock on heaven's gate. Yeah.
But I've never heard legal was considered a black hole.
They're not profit center, right?
No, but it's, I mean, since businesses started, when fire was invented, I mean, legal has always been at the crux of an important thing, right? Cybersecurity was never, right? I mean, it's much later, it's developed over time.
Yeah.
But actually, I would take it back to the same narrative we were talking about earlier. A lot of senior leaders, executives still don't understand what drives their business. They don't understand that at the core of their business, there is a technology core that their entire business runs on top of. And then when that core fails, people are not flying and their luggage is not getting where it needs to go.
Yep.
Right?
Thank you, Delta.
And so,
And
so,
people dying in Arizona emergency hospital, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Outside thing,
Yeah, that, and so, because of that misdirection of attention or that lack of understanding of how their business enterprise works, people, processes, and oh, by the way, technology, right? That they're not equally weighing the investment and the return on that investment. They're still just looking at it as a cost. Why do I have to spend more money on technology? Why do I have to, our investors want this return, we need to pay these salaries, or, I want my bonus or whatever that is. If we're not profitable enough, I'm not getting my quarterly bonus or whatever that, I'm not getting my quarterly bonus, right? So, that's where I think you gotta take it back to, more than just a number sense, it has to be an emotional type. Right, and I personally really hate the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, like pitch. And like, you know, letting that come out. But there is a stark reality that if your company gets breached, the C-suite's gonna get woken up.
Yep.
You know, like, and that's an emotional tie. So that's why, that's again, why I'm bringing it back to this narrative that's been presented reflects a deeper understanding of beliefs and values that are incorrect, right? So I think that's where the cultural shift of the values, but also beliefs and how you think about how the technology actually affects you in your day-to-day, your job, whether your role, wherever that is in the company, is really important.
I think your role is business enablement, not being a cost center. Without the technology, the business ceases to make money. Like it just shuts down. It can't do anything. So the fact is, there's a symbiotic relationship there, and yeah, it costs something, but you know, if you don't pay that bill, it will come due, you know, in other ways.
Yeah.
Like it will cost you way more if you don't invest in your.
Is there
So
standard that how much of the IT budget should spend on the cybersecurity?
42. It depends. I'd have to be true farm
The
leader.
industry rule of thumb has been that you should be spending 10% of your annual revenue on technology and 10% of that on cybersecurity. But cybersecurity has been increasing in cost over, you know, over many, many years, right? And the threat landscape is absolutely changing on a week by week basis. So I don't think those numbers really apply that are.
So 1% of the total revenue should be spent on the cybersecurity.
Yeah.
10% of.
In that paradigm, yeah.
1%. So how many of, let's say, top 100 enterprises are spending 1% on cybersecurity?
I couldn't tell you.
I have no idea. I've never
So
researched that.
so basically, we are saying that we do not know how much they spend or how much should be.
I actually think the spend is not the right question. I think where we all fit in the enterprise risk management framework is a more important piece, right? So I'm a serial entrepreneur and founder, right? And the way I look at it, we've got other entrepreneurs in the room too. Thanks for being here. But the way I look at it is, if you own it or operate or you're a corporate director of a business, you have to make calculated risks, right? Around the operation of your business, right? And that you need a framework for understanding risk. One of those risks is legal and regulatory risk. Another one of those risks is cybersecurity risk, right? And then you have to either figure out how to accept that risk as a last resort, probably, mitigate that risk or manage that risk, transfer that risk, okay? Or maybe there's one or two other options to consider that I'm forgetting in the risk management framework, right? But there are a number of different factors that affect your risk level, you know, not the least of which is legal and regulatory landscape, right? But the cybersecurity landscape is definitely one of those as well, right? And so, and I think that goes both ways. Unfortunately, I think we've been not considering the other way it goes as much recently until CrowdStrike, you know.
Yep.
Now we're thinking about it going, you know, the other direction, what things within the organization could be a threat to the organization or be misused or whatever, or know before is another one that's now come to light. But I think that I would actually take it off the dollars and more to the risk management framework and say, where does this fit in our acceptable levels of risk? And if you're in a more mature org, your board should have a risk statement, a risk appetite statement. We have a moderate, we have a high or a low appetite for risk. And then you align your spending with that risk statement, and when these risks are above that risk appetite, that's when you say, hey, leadership or executive team, this risk is above what our board has said is acceptable. What are we gonna do about that? That's where it goes back to the risk register, right? So it's really like these things around like budget and like the dynamic and, how the response and stuff, they're really, I feel like they're seated in a much bigger framework of, like, they're pieces of a much bigger framework. And I was gonna bring this book up earlier, but Eric, have you read the How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk?
I'm not, but I'm gonna put it on the reading list.
So it's basically the Bible for quantitative risk analysis. Written, co-authored by, the developers of the FAIR framework, and co-founders of Risk Lens, and essentially how to do quantitative risk analysis and how to actually put dollar values to something in cybersecurity.
Can you say the name again?
How to measure anything in cybersecurity risk.
Yeah, so it's not, it's the foreword is by Jack Jones, who is the founder of FAIR, but it's not written by Jack Jones. Yeah, foreword. So it is written by two others, how to measure anything in cybersecurity. Yeah, that's a version 2, edition 2, which is recently released.
Shankar, do you have additional like perspectives on the risk? You have a lot more risk education probably than most of us do, so.
And privacy.
And privacy, yeah.
Privacy, yeah.
No, I think you guys covered a lot of it, but quantitative risk using, I think at the end of the day, if a CISO cannot answer a question, how much risk we have, then, it's all subjective. So if you cannot quantify the risk in terms of dollar figures, so risk quantification means different to different people, but I completely endorse the open standard factor analysis of information risk FAIR. It's been around for 10 plus years. There are at least 3-4 commercial companies who work in that area, like Balbix and Threat Connect and Risk Lens is acquired by a different company for safe security or something like that. Yeah. So high risk doesn't make any sense. Medium risk, moderate risk doesn't make any sense to me. Medium, low, high, high, medium risk doesn't make any sense to me. So $5 million risk makes sense to me. $50 million risk makes sense to me, because then I can quantify whether the controls that we are going to put together, whether using licenses or the resources, if this costs like $5 million and the risk is only 500K, it doesn't make sense to put those controls in. If the controls cost 500K and the risk is $5 million, then it makes sense to me to apply those controls.
Well, that makes sense from a CEO perspective too. The CEO will say, well, what
And
does it cost me if I
anybody who is going to sign
the thing, $5,000, we make 50 million a month.
One of the
Pay
questions
it.
you can ask, right, and that's the detail of the risk appetite statement that I think you're getting at too, Shankar. So one of the questions you can ask in assisting in developing that is, if we had a cybersecurity related loss, what would our single loss expectancy like threshold be? What would our single loss tolerance be? They might say $1 million, 50 million, 500 million, 100 million. We would be able to, we think that we'd be able to recover from that or whatever. But most boards and executive teams don't even want to think about that. They're shudder to think, and so they probably avoided to actually put a number on it. But again, it's threat modeling for the business, right? What is our actual? I mean, I worked at a company where their single loss expectancy was $100 million, and that made it very, very difficult to justify spend unless it was a very severe level of spend. It would have to impact critical business systems that would result in severe financial losses, right? So, but for most businesses, it's probably a lot lower. It's probably like maybe if they're manufacturing and they're a 500-person company, they're going to lose $2 million a day, and after 7 days they're out of business. Because they'll never recover from the revenue from those days.
I think you have to remember the risk is a business decision. It's not an IT decision. It's not a security decision. If you have security and IT,
No, it's a business decision.
Well, the business has to be the one making the decision. So you might say, hey, we need to get the latest and greatest firewall from Palo Alto, whatever. It's gonna cost us $20,000. The business can say, cool. You have $5,000. Get into this $5,000. There will be risks that you will not cover. Because again, anybody who's been here and made a proposal, hey, we should spend this much money, the business might say, yeah, no. And it's like, okay, well, okay, cool. I can accept that. What do you want us to do? Business needs to tell us, what is the risk? What do you want us to ignore because you're not doing it? If they, again, I don't think there's a number of how much you should spend on cybersecurity because, again, IT is all about getting stuff to work. In grand scheme of things. Security, managing risk and doing it securely, they do sometimes conflict. But you can say, hey, what is it gonna cost us if we don't have a good firewall? What's the worst that can happen? Somebody said, if your IT system goes down, then what? Does business stop? But no, CrowdStrike happened last week. A lot of systems went down. How many businesses completely stopped functioning? So do they have a DR plan also? Sometimes that might be, hey, we're gonna pen and paper it for a little bit. There was our dealership had an issue where their core system went down. And there were some dealerships that just shut down completely. Others who said, hey, we're gonna pen and paper.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked in a hospital. Hospitals are heavily computer users. And those computers, they suck. Quite simply, some of them, they are underpowered, they are never clean, they suck. And if that entire system goes down, guess what? Patients don't die. But you have to have a plan, and it doesn't always involve spending more money because the business will say, hey, we don't want to spend.
My interaction with the business doesn't go by the argument. My interaction with the business, they always want to see the data. Everyone wants to see the data. They don't want to spend on IT, they want to spend on the sales, which will make them more money. Unless we present the data to them, that this is the top 50 or 100 Fortune 500 companies are spending, and this is where you are standing. That's will make them to understand. So if we talk and if we tell them, like, last year there was some gas company had some cybersecurity problem, they will not understand. So unless we have framework, legal framework, which is kind of mandatory. We have a lot of legal framework in the financial world, right? We have a lot of legal framework these days for green reporting or environment friendly reporting. So if there is a legal framework for the security threat and other things, that people make them to comply with it. So I'll get a money for it. And if there is some data which says that, okay, this is what market is coming 1%, something like this. Then
I
you could also
agree
make them.
I agree with him 100%.
But there is
Executives
also
would like to see the
make
numbers.
them spend something. But unless we have a data, we can talk, and then talk will go on and on and on.
But here's the thing. What if your sales guys can't do sales because their computers don't work, or they can't VPN from home? I agree, yeah, you want to show them the data.
Nobody will budget for once in lifetimes.
You know,
I don't know, nobody will.
those once in a lifetime things happen more than you want to believe.
And nobody will let you their monthly bonus, bi-yearly bonus, or once in a lifetime.
Again, I'm aware of that, but there is no.
You can talk about the risk.
Good talks. Idea that you said. In my company, at least there, I say, go pick up a couple of.
I'm kind of scared that people will be like monkeys with like razors, you know? It's the newest.
That makes sense.
Monkeys with razor people with like,
Because I mean, what that is, even now it's something. But it's, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a sensitive thing. Probably shouldn't come. And a lot of times, like, the companies go,
You can build an actual Amazon, you can do garbage trays with regular expressions. You it's fine. So even if it's not like, I don't know, like social security number, this and that, you can build your own. And define what's like security for you and you can just build your own.
We have a.
Yeah. It seems like that. I'm hoping that they'll talk more about threat models. So yeah, with that link that they shared, yeah, that's, that spreadsheet, we actually use it. When you guys take a look, they were looking, got a little spreadsheet on there, you can see, that's the one we use.
Yeah, I want to see that.
I mean, it does. Is. But, it's a good one. There's the Facebook, like, program we have, and you do it. Like a lot of times our the whole thing. And that's, do I think that they're doing it right? No, probably not. It's that easy, it's that impressive, at least someone that's. I think that's.
Building the test environment, the concept, with rubric, and I put like everywhere like multi-factor authentication and the password and also your account. And people thought that was great. Be like, best practice,
Right,
that's how it's supposed to be. It's like, no, they won't have admin hours, like everywhere, credentials.
Yeah. It's not have to worry about the role that is at the VP or something along those
Just asking questions, you know, we can make it up, like, we got the application. One person knows what it is, another person's the threat modeling. You have to collaborate a lot, something like that. Something like that, just a show, because. Like it up for us, well, we like to put in the support application. Not in the
people. What if you were and make it work for them? Why?
It's just, it's hard because you're now.
I guess it makes sense, like you said, like it's built on.
Can you walk us now?
Huh?
Yeah, we're not,
ready?
let's jump
You ready?
in, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I have a beer. There's no secret zone here.
I mean, I like your point, the way you laid it out, it's a cultural thing, and so you gotta chip hands, but I have one question. You guys seems to be building the whole kibosh yourself, you don't wanna talk to any of the vendors.
Because it's the money that's holding it.
Okay.
If you're gonna go after,
You
you're
gotta
gonna
be doing
money,
some evaluations.
I do, but when you get into environments where vendors have to get vetted,
Yeah.
that's the hard part.
Really, what's the hard part? Is it just money approval is the hard part, or is it risk rewarded?
Taking on.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I just everybody's talking about like threat modeling or about threat modeling. The last time we did that, so I'm just. When you said we, I wasn't sure if you were talking about with Brett, the royalty, yeah, so, yeah.
Okay, you've already been. Good. You've got a great stick. Yes. But when it comes down to the big lights, it's like.
Yeah.
we don't have that.
Let's take it together. I have all that workplace.
Yeah.
It's up to a lot of the big financials too.
Yeah, I'll go like
Back,
that.
it just do more of that,
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some people that. Like,
Oh,
you wanna do that?
Really?
Hey.
Thanks, man. Good job, buddy.
You like to talk country?
And that's how it's spelled too, it's like, I'm not gonna Z scale or, and I'll open this the other vendor, it's like. It's like, hey, if you want, but like, that's. Yeah, something like, cool to run, like, whatever, you want it, like, you have your name. Pretty cool. Yeah.
That's what they say, you know, that's we can get it.
I would say.
Yeah, we need to search.
No, because he needs to control.
Oh, of course, it's always what we call it.
Yeah.
Your son.
So it's your idea for the,
If I need to, then I'll take it.
I was wondering if like, they actually have, I don't know. They actually, you have something like come up with, like, 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 like,